Preseason is just about a week away. And of course, before we get into preseason, why not? Everybody likes some power rankings. So today, I'm going to be giving you guys my preseason NFL power rankings. Amir is here to react. We're going to talk about every single NFL team. Should be tons of fun. If you enjoy, we're on the road to 20K. Support us down below. All right, Amir. How you doing? Of course, some busy stuff coming up for you as far as training camp and all that nature. If you didn't know, Amir, of course, is a cornerback here at the collegiate level. Big week for you here coming up.
I'm excited. Time is ticking. I'm going into my fourth year. Honestly, I mean, it's really just locking in right now. Getting my diet right. Training. Constantly. Running around, all that stuff. So I'm ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different kind of grind to play. Whether if you're at the collegiate level, really collegiate level and up, it's a different kind of grind that I obviously was not suited for. That's why I'm here with the podcast. But let's get into it here. I broke these teams down into multiple different tiers. So just keep that in mind. We'll talk about these tiers as we go on. The very bottom tier is the first overall pick slash Shador slash Carson Beck tier here. These are teams that either really need a quarterback going forward, or I just don't think they're going to be very good this year because it just could be a rebuilding year for this franchise. The Patriots, they have their quarterback in Drake May going forward. They don't need one of those quarterbacks, but there's that talented edge coming out of Missouri. Of course, I forgot his name. Amir, you might know. But of course, the first overall pick, a lot can change in a year. So who knows? Maybe they do go with a quarterback and pull a Josh Rosen. But for the Giants, of course, I'm not a big fan of Daniel Jones, as we saw in that documentary so far. For the Giants, the front office is willing to move off of him for the right quarterback. So this year they're going to go all out, see what they have in Daniel Jones, pass more than they ever have. But of course, I don't think he is the guy for them. After that, Sean Payton and the Broncos, this might be his farewell tour as a head coach in the NFL. And the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints are definitely the best team on this board, but Amir, as we've talked about, this is kind of our hope for the Saints as they're a team that's kind of just stuck in mediocrity right now. And as much as, I don't want to say Derek Carr's a bad quarterback, but this team is aging. Ryan Ramczyk, Amir, they're paying him like over $10+ million this season, and they just ruled him out for the entire year, and he's going to retire.
Wow.
So so this, the team of course got worse. They brought in some okay pieces like Chase Young, and they had an okay draft in Talise Fuaga, who's one of my guys. I love him, but at the end of the day, I don't think any of these four teams are. I think it's more beneficiary for their futures to go after the first overall pick and set their team up, whether at the quarterback position or another solid piece. But your thoughts about these teams?
Personally, I agree with you on Daniel Jones. I think for this Giants team, and, right now, they're sort of kind of facing, what they did and offering that giant contract. Years ago, I mean, me and you were both were saying that, they should have, honestly moved on from him. And, they kind of looked at that one playoff year where they, barely squeezed in and looked, okay, we got to go ahead and pay this guy. Now they're dealing with those repercussions, and so Daniel Jones is on a hot seat. The only way he'd be able to keep his job is for him to really, play on some all-time, MVP level, which probably isn't going to happen. And so, for the Patriots, obviously they'll keep Drake May. I think what they should do is, maybe go after a receiver, maybe like Luther Burden. If he has a great year. This year, out of Missouri, I think he could be a generational talent. He has that ceiling, in my opinion. A team like the Broncos, I agree with you as well. I think Sean Payton, might be on his farewell tour. I think they sort of looked at Russ as a scapegoat. And I think this year we're going to see, the Broncos be like a 3-win, 4-win team and be even worse because they should have kept Russ, in my opinion. And so for the Saints team, this Saints team, I say out of these other three teams, I say they have probably the best future, even if they end up getting that first pick. I mean, they're a team that always has a great defense every year. And so I think, for them, if they can grab, a quarterback like Shador or Carson Beck, hopefully, personally, I'm more high on Shador, just based off of what I've seen off the eye test. And, the fact that, he seems like he's the most NFL ready right away. He barely turns the ball over. He has great arm talent. And so, I think overall, the Saints probably have, the best future, in my opinion, going forward, if they decide to tank this year, which I think they personally should. And so, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, a lot of head coaching changes might be coming for these teams. Of course, Gerard Mayo, first year guy, he is safe for a year or so there. But Sean Payton, Brian Daboll, and Dennis Allen, who's the worst coach in the league, all three of those guys might be looking for a different job next season. But I'll ask you this for every single tier. Who is one player or a couple of players that you're most excited to watch here going into next season? Of course, to me, guys like Audric Estime, I like him. I think he's a little bit overhated because of his combine score there in Denver. Of course, but there's of course there's some other guys and storylines. The Patriots have some interesting receiver battles there. But who's one player that you're not maybe not the most excited for, but you're interested to see what they can do?
Honestly, a player I'm interested to see is, Troy Franklin. I think it's
Yes.
interesting that he got drafted to Denver, back with his quarterback, in Bo Nix. And I'm kind of curious to see how it translates. Obviously, if I'm not mistaken, he didn't test that well at the combine.
No, he
And,
didn't.
right, his draft stock kind of tanked down a little bit. At first, I still think he still has some solid upside. I think he's still, explosive. He's still, a playmaker. And I think, I'm really just kind of curious to see what he'll do. And another two guys, Malik Neighbors and Drake May. Malik Neighbors, a lot of people had him ranked over Marvin Harrison in their, pre-draft rankings. And personally, Marvin Harrison is great, but I'm kind of in the middle where it's like, you can't go wrong with either one. When I watch Malik Neighbors, he reminds me just of Jamar Chase, a guy who's, deceptively fast, a guy who can, run, deep routes to the tee, make plays, when he catches the ball. And, this year, I'm not expecting him to have, a 15, 100-yard season and break records because he has Daniel Jones as his quarterback and also, kind of a decline in offense. But, I'm really curious to see what he'll do. And Drake May, I'm curious to see because, I think he has boom or bust potential. I think he's either going to be, kind of like a Justin Herbert who came in and shocked everyone, and kind of played above, the standards, which he was called to do. Or, will he completely just, fold and struggle, in this struggling Patriots franchise right now?
I wonder how much he's going to play this year or when he's going to start playing because, of course, they got Jacoby Brissett for that bridge quarterback reason. And for the Giants also, for Malik Neighbors, like you mentioned, he's kind of the only real weapon in that offense after Darren Waller retired. But those are the bottom four teams, I think, in my eyes, or at least for the Saints. I'm hoping that they are a bottom four team for their future, for the future of their franchise, of course. This next tier is a rebuilding tier slash a step. This is the year where we just want to see a step in the right direction. They can be a 4, 5, 6 win team, but we want to see them be competitive and we want to see their young guys take that next step. So again, this isn't necessarily about the win category. We just want to see all these young pieces put it together on the field and give this franchise hope going forward. For the Bears, this might be a shock here, but at the end of the day, it is a rebuilding year. And as talented as Caleb Williams is or can be, this is the first year in the NFL. He has never played in the NFL, and the NFL is a completely different game than the collegiate level, especially when you play at USC. So for Caleb Williams, he has all the weapons around him. I don't know if we've ever seen a quarterback come in with a better supporting cast in ever in NFL history. And the Bears team is a team that, if everything goes right, could make a push for the playoffs. For the Vikings, they draft J.J. McCarthy after losing Kirk Cousins. Now they have all the same talented weapons, a great offensive line, great weapons, but now it's either Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy. So how ready is J.J. McCarthy going to be if he plays this season? Or is Sam Darnold going to have a career resurgence, but we still worry about that defense? So again, rebuilding year kind of for the offense. For the Titans, Will Levis, of course, now leads the ship, and it's officially his team now. So they lost Derrick Henry, they lost Mike Vrabel, and of course, it's a new chapter there in Tennessee football, or for the Titans football, rather. But of course, they brought in Calvin Ridley. Now they have a dynamic receiving room. Chigoziem Okonkwo, we're still waiting on that breakout, my brother. But outside of that, they brought in L'Jarius Sneed. They brought in, of course, Chidobe Awuzie. Titans, Bears, Vikings. Amir, your thoughts on these three teams, and of course, why they're in this tier?
I think all three of these teams are, in the perfect tier. Especially a team like the Titans. The Titans, for them to kind of have a quick turnaround from being, this sort of, semi, or actually, playoff team,
Yeah.
and, kind of move off from Ryan Tannehill and also move off from Derrick Henry, in a short amount of time. I think, for them, they're honestly in the right step, direction. I think last year Will Levis showed that, he has some upside, he has some potential. He has kind of that it factor, that winning mentality, pretty much that mindset you want your franchise guy to have. And so I think they've honestly done a really good job of sort of, building the defense back up, like you mentioned, getting, a Wouzier, Jarius Sneed, who I'm also excited to see as well. Also going on getting Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard. And so I think, this is still, a rebuild year. I have them winning about 7 games or 6, 7 games, anything around that mark this year. But I think they're honestly in the right direction. And the person I'm most excited to see is Caleb Williams. I'm high on
I'm
Caleb
gonna ask
Williams.
you.
A lot of people aren't, a lot of people are sort of, letting their bias get in the way of, him kind of being a diva and being, a bad leader, this and that. But, I think the only thing that'll really stop him from really, being good in the league is, his mental and his leadership, obviously. But I mean, talent alone, looking at this Bears team, seeing how well they played the second half of the year last year, the fact that even with Fields, you know, throwing the ball, you know, kind of, not, over the top, but throwing the ball on a mediocre level,
Yeah.
slightly above mediocre, I'd say, and they were still winning games. And seeing how great the defense was, and the fact that they have a top 10 edge rusher and a top 5 corner, I think that this Bears team is going to make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I know you're a lot higher on the Bears than me, and they could be in tiers above this, but I'm not as high on you. I think they do definitely make a push for it. I think they're probably 1 or 2 games shy at the end of the day. But I was going to ask you, and of course, the answer is Caleb Williams out of these 3 teams. But outside of that, I'm a big Jordan Addison guy. I want to see him take a step up. But outside of that, of course, the Titans as a whole, interested to see what they can do. The Panthers, the Commanders, and the Cardinals. Of course, the Cardinals, big Kyler Murray fan, but they went out there and, of course, they had a great draft. They addressed the offensive line. They bring in, of course, Darius Robinson. They bring in Marvin Harrison Jr. They bring in, of course, Trey Benson late in the drafts. This is a team that it's a make or break year for John Gannon. I wouldn't say it's a make or break year for Kyler Murray, but definitely an interesting offseason, and I'm excited. I think just like the Bears in your eyes, I think the Cardinals can shock some people. For the Commanders, of course, they drafted Jaden Daniels. He's set to be the starter from day one. Now they're interested to see what do we do with Brandon Ayuk. But outside of that, great offseason. The Commanders had actually a very underrated draft. We talked about it, of course, a couple weeks back. I really like their draft. Of course, most notably a guy like Johnny Newton. But the Panthers, big year number 2 for Bryce Young, the former number 1 overall pick. For these 3 teams, it's just a matter of, they're very young teams. They need to take a step in the right direction. And at the end of the day, it's a rebuilding year. But I will say, Dave Canales for the Panthers is huge. He's transformed 2 quarterbacks already in the last couple of years. I'm hoping that he can do the same for a guy like Bryce Young. I'm not a Bryce Young fan, but of course, he was the number 1 pick for a reason. So selfishly, I want to see such a special player live up to his potential. But Amir, your thoughts on these right 3 teams here in the middle of your screen? And what's one team, or I guess your thoughts, but then what's one team or player that you're most excited to watch?
You brought up a good point. I think the key for the Panthers is Dave Canales. And, I'm high on Bryce Young still. I've been watching him ever since modern day in high school. Me being in high school, kind of growing up, and, our high school team playing on a national ranking, national setting, and always seeing that, okay, modern day is always that number 1 team in the country. And
Yeah.
so,
I mean, you guys weren't too far behind in the grand scheme of
yeah,
things.
yeah, I want to say the highest we were ranked was like 6 or 7. And, always seeing, modern day being the number 1 team, we kind of looked up to guys like Bryce Young, Amara St. Brown, Brew McCoy, those type of guys, playing that modern day. And so I think Dave Canales, in my opinion, is the key to this Panthers team. And I'm most excited to see Bryce Young, see what he's going to do. The bottom 2 teams, the Cardinals, are kind of interesting because, Kyler Murray and a lot of people are still high on him. I actually think he's a good talent personally. I'm probably not, as high on him like you are. View him as the top 5 quarterback in the league. I view him anywhere between 15 to 20. So, I think for this team, they still have a lot of holes. But, I think this year they have their franchise receiver, they have their franchise guy. I believe that, they can build a connection on to kind of keep, Kyler Murray in Arizona and kind of keep this team up and running and shock a lot of people this year.
It's going to be a great year for Trey McBride there in Arizona. I'm excited to see what he can do. But also in Carolina, last thing I want to mention, underrated receiving core. Deontay Johnson and, of course, Xavier Legette. Interested to see what they can do. Also, Jatavion Sanders out of Texas. He reminds me of a guy like David Njoku, if you're not familiar, Amir. But let's get into the underwhelming teams. These are the teams that could, I guess depending on which fan base you ask, these are teams that some people would say can make the playoffs. On the other hand, though, these are teams that, at either ended the season great last season, and now they have those same expectations for this year. Whatever the case is, these are some teams that I think are going to underwhelm this season and finish short of their mark because, of course, it's a little bit different for every team. For Jacksonville, their goal is to make the playoffs or compete for this division. They were dominating the division last year, but once the Texans caught their stride, and of course the rest of the league caught on, the Jaguars ended up falling off a little bit and ended up missing the playoffs. For the Raiders, I'd say their goal is to make the playoffs or be in that range, compete for let's say 8 to 10 wins. I don't think either of those happen for either of these two teams. But your thoughts here? Do you think that I'm wrong about one of these teams? Do you think one of these teams can make a playoff push, or at the very least look a lot better than what I think they will?
Personally, I think all these teams are underwhelming, as far as, their expectations of how they should play. I think the Raiders are, I wouldn't put them in underwhelming. I'll probably put them a tier lower because I think, this team doesn't really have many expectations, but a team like Jacksonville, and, Seattle, I think both these teams are underwhelming. We saw last year, with Jacksonville, how they sort of folded at the end of the year. I mean, like there's a point in the season where me and you were looking like, yo, this team could really be legit. I mean, they went on a win streak, I think like 3, 4 games.
At the
The
mid-season
defense,
mark, they were like 6-2.
right? Yeah, and their defense was playing like a top five defense in the league. Lights out. T-Law was playing great despite the injuries, and so I think going into this year, I mean, they have no receiving core. I mean, the O line is still, not up to par. Kind of mediocre. The defense, they lost some pieces. In their secondary, and so this team, in my opinion, is going to be underwhelming this year.
And I will say for Jacksonville, Brian Thomas Jr., of course, out of LSU, Gabe Davis they brought in, and then of course they still have Christian Kirk, who I think will be the number one wide receiver there in Jacksonville. Of course, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne as well. The offense, I think, will be good. I just worry about the defense. And I know they have some solid pieces, but in that division where you can't make really a lot of mistakes, it's going to be tough to see Jacksonville bounce back. Now, is this anger from last year because I predicted them to go really far and they didn't? That could also be playing a part. But on the NFC side of things, I think some underwhelming teams could be the Tampa Bay Bucks. Last year they made the playoffs. They're probably going into this year with the why not us? Why can't we do it again mindset. I don't think that it's going to happen. I think Dave Canales leaving is going to show here for Tampa Bay and of course Baker Mayfield. I hope that this offense continues to produce at that level, but even if they do, the defense is let's just say bottom 10 in the league. The defense is not what it once was when Brady was there. And it's definitely, they're going to need a year or two to get back to, a decent level as far as a team defense. So my biggest questions are the defense, the play calling, and of course, can Baker Mayfield continue to play at this level that he was last year? It's just some big questions. And I think, some other teams in that division have gotten better. So I think they're going to underwhelm and probably miss the playoffs this season. For the Seahawks, a lot of the same. I think they can be a solid 7 to 10 win football team if everything goes right. The schedule is actually not that bad for the Seahawks. However, Geno Smith, again, is he going to continue to produce or is he going to struggle like he did last year, where even when he was healthy, he had guys playing over him at certain points of the season? This is a team that it's the same story for the Seahawks. They have a lot of solid pieces. But do they have the right head coach? Now they brought in Mac McDonald. Can he, lead this team back to where they were a couple years ago? And of course, do they have the quarterback? So unproven quarterback, unproven coach. Just some big worries here about the Seattle Seahawks. But your thoughts here about the NFC side of things.
So, I would say, for these two teams, the Bucks, in my opinion, I'm with you on this. I think, they honestly didn't do much to really sort of upgrade this team as a whole. The defense is still going to struggle like last year. Despite having Winfield, I mean, they lost Carlton Davis. Their best corner, and so I mean, what was really saving this team last year was their pass rush. And personally, I don't think the pass rush is going to be as good this year. And despite their pass rush saving the defense, they were still bad. And so I think going into this year, the offense as well. I think Baker is a great quarterback or good quarterback. I say, but personally, I don't think he's the answer, for this franchise. And so because they haven't really made much of a move, in the fact that every NFC team got even better. The Falcons got better in their division. The Panthers got better, and they still gave them
Bears.
problems. Right. The Bears as well, the Packers. All these teams, and so I think for that reason, they're going to be underwhelming and sort of fall to a lower tier. And for the Seattle team, I think getting Mac Donald was a good move. I think they did
Byron Murphy as
a
well
solid.
out of Texas.
Yeah, yeah. They also did a solid job of attacking that D line. Kind of building that D line up, and they also have one of the best cornerback duos in the league. Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen. I think their biggest loss was losing Quandre Diggs, but what I've sort of what I'm worried about this team is the fact that them just underperforming as a whole. Last year, I mean, they still had some solid pieces. DK and Tyler Lockett. I mean, they're both they're really good receivers, but they both played under whelming last year. And, we saw Kenneth Walker sort of you know the youngest star player on that team. Sort of have the most impact on that team, and so I think this team will be underwhelming despite the talent that they have.
Yeah. And again, this is not to say that these are going to be bottom feeder teams. They're going to be in the range of 6 to 10 wins. I just think if the goal is to make the playoffs, these teams are not going to meet that goal. Let's talk about some teams here now that are going to be in the wild card range or right outside. So some teams I think that are either knocking outside the door, right? They're going to be, again, in the AFC, you see four teams here. These are teams that can either be 5, 6, 7, or they can be 5 to 10. You guys get the picture. They're right on the fringe, wild card worthy teams. The Dolphins, the Bills, both in the AFC East, the Chargers, which might be a shock, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers don't ever have a losing season, and if you're above 500, you're going to be in the mix for the wild card. In the AFC side of things, out of these four teams, what shocks you here with my predictions? And of course, any big questions about any of these four teams?
Well, the one that probably stands out to me the most right here, I personally say is Chargers. But personally, I think the Chargers, this isn't a bad tier because I don't think they'll play underwhelming. I think everybody's sort of expects, or I mean, at least if you're not a casual fan, should expect this team to not be over the top good like they were last year because they lost both their number one and number two receiver and their starting running back. And so I think with this team, Jim Harbaugh's going to come with his mantra, stop the run the football, win a turnover battle. I think, if you do those three things, with the team, it doesn't matter what roster you have. If you can stop the run the football, and win a turnover battle, on a game-to-game basis, you're going to win games. And so I think this team's going to, be around 7 to 8 wins, just outside that wild card, sort of show the potential that they have, for coming years.
Yeah, I'm starting to get higher on the Chargers because of those three things that you mentioned there. And to top it all off, when they need to make that big play, they have a top five level quarterback in Justin Herbert. Not to say he is a top five, but he's on that level. They're going to win football games. That's what Jim Harbaugh has done. Maybe not at the highest level all the times, but he wins football games. And I think they're going to win enough, like you mentioned, to be in that conversation. And then to a lot of people's surprises, of course, if you've been following the channel, I have been praising Jordan Love since day one of this channel, and we're approaching the 2 year mark. I predicted the breakout here on the channel, but Jordan Love, of course, tremendous quarterback. I think he's a top 10 level quarterback in the NFL already. However, this is a team that I don't think that they're going to win the division. I don't think that they're going to beat out Detroit. Of course, both of us, not to say Green Bay's bad, I just think that Detroit is that good where Green Bay can even win 10 games this season and not win the division. So I think Green Bay will be anywhere from 5 to 7 in the NFC side of things. They're young, they're fun, and they have a superstar level quarterback. Of course, they're going to be in this conversation for pretty much the next 10 years. The Packers have done it yet again. But your thoughts about the Packers here? Is there any shock here why they're in the wild card tier?
No, I mean not. No, I mean not really. In my opinion, the NFC North is the second best division of football.
Wow.
In my honest opinion, and I think, for the Packers, I mean, the Packers honestly have a great competition against, not only the Lions but also the Bears, and I think, the NFC got even better. And last year, we kind of saw like a big difference between the AFC and the NFC. The AFC, every team, was tough, and the NFC was kind of, not a cakewalk, but kind of easier, on those bottom tier teams. But this year, the NFC, in my opinion, is up to par with the AFC. I mean, they are loaded. The NFC North alone. I mean, you have three playoff level teams in my opinion, and also you have the Vikings who are also going to be a team that's going to be tough to beat throughout the regular season. So I think this Green Bay team is obviously as far as good they're going to be above wild card standards. I think the NFC is that good to where they're going to be on that wild card
Yeah.
ranking.
No, absolutely. Is the NFC North better than the AFC East? The AFC East, of course, Bills, Jets, Dolphins. But in the NFC
Personally,
North, NFC North, of course, you got
personally,
the Bears, Packers, Detroit.
personally, I think based off the projection
Vikings.
that the Packers are going, I think they're going to be better this year because I think the Patriots being as bad as they are carries a lot of weight. I think in the NFC North you have no slouches. I think the Vikings are a good team.
Yeah.
Great offense, solid defense. I think for the AFC East, you have the Jets, they're great. You have the Dolphins, but I think they're going to be slightly worse, and also the Bills are going to be slightly worse.
Let's get into the good, not great tier. Of course, these are teams that are going to make the playoffs. They might win a game or two, but they're not going to be great enough to win the Super Bowl or, for the most part, the AFC or NFC championship. So these are teams that are going to be good, not great. I can't see them going to the Super Bowl. I guess I could potentially, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but more likely than not, I have my Super Bowl contenders for a reason. For the AFC side of things, we'll start with the AFC North. Like you mentioned, super talented division. Pittsburgh was in the last tier. This tier has the rest of the AFC North teams. The Ravens, who their secondary has gotten worse. I worry a little bit about their defense, especially with the departure of Mike McDonald. But the Ravens win football games. That's what they do. The Bengals, of course, they have the return of Joe Burrow. T. Higgins seemingly has, I guess, put a Band-Aid on their relationship as of now. They seem to be ready to go for next season, but they've also lost some pieces on the defense. How much is that going to impact their late season push? And then the Browns, it all depends on number 4, Deshaun Watson. If he is 80% of what he was in Houston, we are legitimate Super Bowl contenders. But that's the problem. He hasn't even been 10% of what he was in Houston. This guy can't complete a simple drag route, it seems like, after all of the nonsense happened. But your thoughts about these teams? Any shock here? Of course, the Ravens, probably the biggest one that jumps off the page, but I worry about their defense.
No, I mean, no, I think out of these three teams, the one team that have the best shot at going on a run will obviously be Cincy because I mean they have the best quarterback out of the three. I think for the Ravens, like you mentioned, their secondary did get worse. And, as good as Kyle Hamilton is, I mean, he's not really, a man-to-man safety. The Ravens, do a great job of sort of, covering up,
They do.
you know, you know,
Weaknesses, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so, if you're going to build around them, I mean, it's also good to have, great corners, other great coverage guys around him as well. I mean, you have, Marlon Humphrey, obviously, but outside of that, I mean, you have no really great cover guys. And so I think the fact that the secondary got worse and they lost Mac Donald, who I think at this point is proven to be a great D coordinator, I think that's going to impact them. But also, like you mentioned, the Ravens win football games. Every year it kind of seems like, if they lose in the playoffs or if they fall short due to injuries or whatever, it seems like they still come back the next year as a great team. They're still going to win, 11 of the 12 games, every single year. So I think they're still going to be great.
Yeah. Now, let me clarify. They brought in Derrick Henry, of course. And what also went into this was the fact that I only wanted to have 5 Super Bowl contenders. So for that reason, that's why the Ravens are in this tier. But if not, if I had it at 6, I think the Ravens, of course, would be that team that I might push up. But let's talk about the AFC South. Good, not great teams. Remember, these are teams I think that can make the playoffs, but probably that is it. No, no conference titles or Super Bowls in their future. Not this season. The Texans, of course, they had a great offseason. Last year, they burst onto the scene. Rookie head coach, rookie quarterback. They dominated. And they gave the Ravens a run for their money there in the divisional round. They add Stephon Diggs. Of course, they extend Nico Collins. Tank Dell is going to be coming back from injury. This team brought in Danielle Hunter on a steal. This team that was so young and fun and dominant, they've only gotten better. So something to look out for, but interested to see how much better or worse CJ Stroud gets in his second year, because that second year typically tells a lot about young quarterbacks. For Anthony Richardson, talking about his second year, we only saw about a month of football from him last year, and he looked like the rookie of the year in that first month of football. But of course, that's when CJ Stroud started to take off. But Anthony Richardson, we just need to see him fully healthy for a full season. But I believe in Shane Steichen. Of course, they brought in Leatu Latu, who is my favorite player in the draft class. but also on the defensive side of the ball. I think he can be the defensive rookie of the year. They still have Buckner. They still have a decent secondary. I believe in the Colts this season, and I think you share that same sentiment. Your thoughts about the AFC South?
Yeah, I believe in the Colts as well. They have, a capable offense, and the fact that they won 10 games or borderline 10 games last year, if I'm not mistaken. I want to say they won nine. They barely lost to the Texans, and people seem to forget. The Colts were one missed check down the way from beating the Texans and making the playoffs. Playing the Browns in that first round. And we saw earlier in that year the Colts almost beat the Browns, and
Yeah.
in a high level scoring game. And so, I'm high on Shane Steichen as well. I'm not as high on AR as you are, but I mentioned this in the past couple months ago. With this team, the fact that they won with Minshew and borderline made the playoffs, even if AR, just does his job, just takes care of the football,
That's
and
all he needs to do. He just needs to
that's
do
all
the
he
bare
needs to do.
minimum.
Exactly. This is going to be a good team, and they brought back Pittman as well. They went and got Latu, like you mentioned. They have
And
one of the
Mitchell
most.
to the offense as well.
Exactly. They have a good offensive line. They have one of the most underrated receivers in football, and Josh Downs, in my opinion. And so I think this is going to be a really good team this year. I think they're going to sneak into the playoffs. And this Texas team, I can't remember. I think besides Joe Burrow, we can't really think of a year two quarterback that really made a run. But I think, in recent time, if it was to be a year two quarterback to go on a run, it'd be this Texas team, with CJ Stroud. And CJ Stroud, at this point, this Texas team is way more loaded than that Bengals team was.
Yeah.
And so, seeing this team, last year, go out and blow out the best defensive football and, completely embarrass them. And, seeing the fact that they've gotten better in every single aspect, I would say, I do worry about, their pass defense a little bit because it did struggle last year. But I'm still high on Derek Stingley. I'm high on Jalen Petrie as well. And so I think this Texas team is also going to be scary.
Yeah, everybody talks about cornerbacks, and of course they are. It's probably the most difficult position to play in the NFL, maybe outside of quarterback. But you got to give cornerbacks at least a rookie contract in my eyes, right? We saw a guy like Jeff Okuda struggle out the gate, and he was a top 5 pick. But we've also seen some late career blooms from some guys in the past. Cornerback is such a difficult position at the NFL level because these receivers are such technicians and masterminds. You got to give those guys at least a rookie contract to make out what they can be. But Derek Stingley, I think you believe in him. I believe in him. And for the Colts, we didn't even mention Jonathan Taylor. He's, of course, coming back for a revenge level season. For the NFC teams in this tier, I'd say the Falcons. Of course, it depends on how good Kirk Cousins is coming off of that Achilles injury. But also, they brought in Zach Robinson as the new offensive coordinator. They want to use Bijan like Christian McCaffrey, something we got to look out for. We're waiting for the breakout from Drake London and Kyle Pitts, most notably. The defense did get a little bit worse, but they're still a great unit. Defensively, still have maybe the best offensive line in football. The Falcons are going to be fun. The Dallas Cowboys, they're here because they are the Dallas Cowboys. Amir, your thoughts about these 3 teams? Who are you most excited to watch here out of these 3 teams?
I'm excited to watch this Rams team. They have one of my favorite players in the league, Puka Nakuya, and I think, this team has potential to be the most explosive offense in football. And last, the fact that, I want to say they won like 8 straight games, at a certain point in the year, or 7 straight, something like that, or they went like 7-1 for a period of time, and
They dominated, yeah.
yeah, dominated. And this team was a couple plays away from, in my opinion, beating Detroit, and I thought they would have beat San Fran and went to the NFC Championship. And so, um, this team is going to be great. They really have no weaknesses offensively. You could argue the offensive line. I think that's probably their biggest weakness. But they have Kyron Williams coming back and it's his second full year playing football. I think he's great. I think their biggest loss is probably Tyler Higbee. Him being off, for a while throughout the year. But defensively, they got even better. They brought back Darius Williams, who I think is a good corner. They went and got Tre'Davious White. They had a great drive, getting Braden Fisk, the dude from out of Florida State. And
Jared
so,
Verse getting
right,
disrupted.
exactly, Jared Verse as well. And so they kind of looked at Aaron Donald retiring and was like, okay, look, we're gonna go ahead, load this D line back up, kind of not fill that void of leadership, but kind of fill that void of talent overall as a whole throughout that D line. And so I think this is going to be a great team this year.
Yeah, Blake Corum as well. I'm not sure how much he's going to be in the mix, but if we know one thing, this is going to be a committee backfield here, at least to somewhat of a degree, under Sean McVay. But let's get into it. The Super Bowl contenders. I try to do these in tiers, tiers within a tier. So these bottom two are, of course, the least likely out of these five. You have the middle two, and then the number one. Of course, hopefully that makes sense. The New York Jets, you might not have them here. I think they're here. And no, it's not because I'm a New York fan. I hate New York because of how much their media pushes their teams to, pushes their teams down our throats. But for the New York Jets, they have it all. They just need to be healthy. They have maybe one of the most talented rosters in the league. My only worry is Robert Saleh. He hasn't proven anything as a head coach. Granted, he hasn't had much around him, much on his rosters to help him prove that, but he hasn't proven much as a head coach. I worry about this team as far as competing in the playoffs, but at the end of the day, they have a top 10, top 5 level quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. So many weapons around him. They've upgraded the offensive line. Defense is maybe the best in the league. They have it all. They just need number 8 to stay healthy. Sounds super weird, by the way, to call Aaron Rodgers number 8.
That sounds so weird.
I'll just call him A-Rod, right? For the Eagles, Nick Sirianni last year or 2 years ago, 2 years ago, of course, they dominated, went to the Super Bowl, and they were up by like 14 points, but they crumbled to the Chiefs late in that game. Last year, of course, they come into the year, they start off like 10-0 or 11-1, of course, and then things kind of went downhill. They ran into a gauntlet of teams, and that just really beat them up, and they started losing confidence. They started getting frustrated. But this offseason, they, of course, aside from Jason Kelsey, of course, retiring, they had a great offseason. They, of course, got so many pieces in the secondary, most notably a guy like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Of course, they brought in a guy like Bryce Huff, Bryce Huff, of course, from the Jets. They had a great offseason. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Maybe no team had a better offseason than the Philadelphia Eagles. They brought back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Eagles, Jets, your thoughts about these teams?
Also, they brought in Saquon too.
Yeah, so how did I forget about Saquon Barkley?
Yeah. I think the Jets teams belong here. I think the only team that sort of pushing for that tier is the Rams, and I'm looking at the Jets last year, seeing them win these games, but having all the QB controversy, the struggling offense going on, and so I think. The fact that the defensive loan, being a top 3 defense in the league, seeing them being statistically the number 2 pass defense in the league last year, them having arguably the best corner in football, probably the top 3 cornerback duo in the league, arguably the best, and so, and seeing the offense too. The fact that they revamped the O-line, the fact that they went ahead and brought in Mike Will to sort of pair with, Rodgers and Garrett Wilson. And, I'm going to have Garrett Wilson. I think he's going to be an all-pro this year. I keep on saying it. And so, I think Aaron Rodgers, even if he's not the same than what he was, he's not going to be far off because at the end of the day, me and you mentioned it. A good year or a bad year for Aaron Rodgers is like, 40 touchdowns and like 8 picks. That's a bad year. And, Aaron Rodgers in his prime, he's throwing, 40 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And so going into this year, the fact that, despite his Achilles injury, he's not mobile anyway. This guy's going to be able to sit in the pocket behind a better O-line. And he's going to have Breece Hall in the backfield. They went and got Braylon Allen, who's one of the most underrated running back prospects in the draft last year.
Youngest prospect in the class.
Yeah, and so this team as a whole should have no problem contending for Super Bowl.
The next tier, the San Francisco 49ers and the Detroit Lions. Now, these top 3 teams are definitely the top 3. So however you want to rank them, you can rank them that way. The Niners, we know what they have. They are the 49ers. They've been dominating the last 5 to 6 years. They have it all to keep going back to that land. And at this point in time, it looks like Brandon Ayuk, is he going to be traded? Is he going to be on the roster? Regardless, of course, they still have a great wide receiver duo in Ricky Pearsall and Deebo Samuel. Still have George Kittle. Still have, of course, Christian McCaffrey. Great offensive. Again, it's the San Francisco 49ers. The only thing we got to worry about is how much they lost on the defensive line. But outside of that, again, it's hard to bet against them. For the Lions, we're both high on them. I think we both might have them as our number 1 Super Bowl contender this season. We'll talk about that in about a month before the season starts. But they have it all. They were right there. And if their analytics team didn't if they strictly just used their football minds last year in that NFC title game, we would have been talking about maybe the Lions as our Super Bowl champions. Crazy as that might sound. And then at number 1, the Kansas City Chiefs. They're going for a 3-peat. They had a subpar roster last year around Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, and they still won it. You cannot bet against this team. You cannot bet against number 15. They are going for NFL history next season, and they've only gotten better, and this roster is now well-rounded. Is that, I don't know. Sometimes I guess less is more, but it's hard to look at this team with maybe the best quarterback of all time and to see them get better going for a three-peat. Amir, they got to be number one for me right now. If
Yeah.
not them, it's the Detroit Lions. Obviously, we've been recording a lot. I'm stumbling over my words, but your thoughts about these top three teams?
I think they're all great. Like you mentioned, I think the Lions outside of the Chiefs is that number one contender. And personally, I have the Chiefs, completing history this year. I kind of hate, sort of, following betting odds, because obviously after a season, the betting odds are always going to have, the team that won the last year as favorites. But I think if any team was a three-peat in complete history, it'd be the Chiefs this year. And so also, with the Niners, I mean, they have the best quarterback in football, in Brock Purdy. So I think the Niners are always going to be able to compete, with Kyle Shanahan, with this loaded offense. I'm excited to see Ricky Pearsall have an impact right away as a rookie. He was, in my opinion, the most NFL-ready rookie receiver coming into the draft.
Wow.
Outside of Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors,
Okay,
I'll
there you
say.
go. There you go. You saved it.
Right, right. And so, personally, the Lions are loaded. Even if Jared Goff, takes a step back from last year, this team is still loaded. They have really no weaknesses, really. You could argue and say, I mean, their secondary is young. That's about it. Besides that, I mean, they have Amara, they have JMO, they have the best running back duo in football. The D line is really good, and so this team is going to be great, but no doubt.
That's it. Episode 196. Again, Amir, how you doing? Anything coming up here for you in the next couple weeks?
Not really. I mean, training camp, football. I'm excited. I'm going to be busy, but I'm still going to find a way to be on the show. I love it here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're next week, of course, will be a pre-recorded episode, just so you guys know. But next week, it's going to be a fun episode. We have Super Bowl 59 potential matchups that we want to see. So some of these teams we talked about today, you're going to see some of these on next week's video as well. But let me know what you think in the comments. Of course, I threw these rankings together briefly. We'll have our official predictions in just about a month's time. But without further ado, do you have anything else you want to throw out there before we get out of here?
Not much. Nope.
All right. Well, then, if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next week.